Welcome back, everyone. At this time every week until the end of the season, KGN, in partnership with PointsBet, is picking the Canadian College GOATs. Now, we will pick one in each position and name an all-time first and second all-GOAT team from players in the NC2A, U Sports, and the CJFL. While the KGN crew will select the final teams, we want your input on the PointsBet Canadian College GOAT. Follow along on Twitter at KGN on TSN and chirp up with your opinion. Now, last week it was quarterbacks. This week it's running backs. So let's get started. To avoid recency bias, we will always look at three different eras. First, foundational running backs. And all of the U Sports running backs on this list had one thing in common. They were at the center of winning championships for their teams. Souls had the best Vanier performance. Brule still leads the U Sports record book in several categories, and Neil Lumsden is in the hall for what he did as a GG. But every time a poll is conducted, the top Washington State Cougar is always Reuben Mays from North Battleford, Saskatchewan. The next-gen running backs, this is fun. Try to pick one of these guys. Tyndale, a two-time Heck winner. Eric Lapointe, he was selected the top player in the history of U Sports about 15 or 20 years back. Timbiaka Batuka went off for 313 versus Ohio State and 1,700 in a single season. And Lumsden was bigger than the conference that he played in. He just didn't win the conference. And last but not least, Deron Diedrich at Nebraska had better numbers than Touchdown Tim on higher-ranked teams. And the most recent set of running backs, Andrew Harris is in this group as the CJFL GOAT. However, this comes down to two guys. John Cornish, who broke the single-season team record at Kansas, or Chuba Hubbard, who was the first and only running back to win the John Cornish Award. Narrow that down to three, Mike. Let's start with you. Give us your top selection from each era and why.
Well, I'll narrow it down because I want to talk a lot about the number one. I'll give a number two tip of the hat to Neil Lumsden and the old guys, and I'm only doing that because I get to call Lumpy an old guy as my old broadcast partner, but he was spectacular at University of Ottawa. Just tremendous. And really, as a kid, he's going to hate me saying this as well, but I actually went to make sure I saw University of Ottawa when they were in Kingston to play Queens, simply because of all the hype around the old guys. So he ranks, but it's another guy from Ottawa in terms of CFL that I'm going to give the nod to, and that's Ronnie Stewart. He was a Queens guy and then went on to greatness in the CFL with the Rough Riders. He still has the CFL record for most yards in a single game at 287, I think is the number. A three-time Grey Cup winner, a three-time All-Star in the CFL, a three-time Gales MVP. He won a couple of Yates Cups as well. He's in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. He's in the Canada Sports Hall of Fame. And, he was a Lionel Conacher winner as the top athlete in Canada one year. I don't know how you can possibly vote against, in my opinion, the GOAT of all Canadian running backs, and that's Ronnie Stewart.
I'm going to go with one from each era and keep it fairly straightforward. I think my guy from pre-91, otherwise known as the pre-Gord Randall years, is Reuben Mays. A guy who, it's a real rags to riches type of story. I mean, North Battleford, Saskatchewan, by the standards of American football, a complete backwater. For him to come out and be one of the greatest players in Washington State history from there is a fantastic story. In that middle era is a guy that is the first kind of U Sports star that I grew up knowing when I was growing up, and that was Jesse Lumsden. When he was part of that McMaster dynasty, he was not just the best player in U Sports, he was like the only player in U Sports, and that's what it felt like at times. The combination of him and Greg Marshall were just fantastic, and frankly, it's just a shame that they always kind of fell short, of achieving that ultimate goal of a Vanier Cup championship. And then in the modern era, We love us some Chuba Hubbard. I mean, everybody who watches this show knows we've talked about him almost ad nauseum the last couple of years. But I got to talk to John Cornish because, Jim, you mentioned it. It's the guy the award is named after, and that recognizes the amount of trailblazing that he did going down to the University of Kansas, rewriting records by a legendary NFL running back in Gale Sayers at that university, and becoming a star down there in his own right. And then I should point out, too, having a very long and successful CFL career as well. So John Cornish is my guy, and again, maybe some local bias there, but that's my guy from the modern group.
And I'll go with Chuba Hubbard from the modern group for basically the same thing Gord said, and that's, as a trailblazer, I think what Chuba Hubbard and Chase Claypool and, Neville Gallimore and Amen Ogbogbemiga did was take the Canadian talent and take it to another level where guys just aren't really good players on smaller programs or bit players on bigger programs. These guys were all stars at major D1 programs. So I'll go with Chuba there. And the middle one was the toughest one for me. I'll give a tip of the hat to somebody we haven't talked about, and that's Andre Durie. When he was at York, all teams did was key on him. He was the offense. And twice in his career, he ran for over 300 yards in a game. 349 is still the benchmark for anybody in the OUA. But if I have to go from somebody from that group, it's Eric Lapointe. He was a two-time Heck Crichton winner. He wasn't with a powerhouse team at Mount A. And what's really neat about Lapointe is he didn't win the Heck Crichtons in back-to-back years. There was a year between the two. So while he didn't necessarily, get to where he wanted to go in terms of a conference championship or a Vanier Cup, Eric Lapointe was just the man. So I want to recognize him as the best of that age group.
Guys, lots of talk about their professional careers. We are here for their college tenure. And based on that, my three are as follows. Mays, he's in the College Football Hall of Fame. I will give honorable mention to Neil Lumsden in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. Number 2, Jesse Lumsden. The poll that was done on the best of all time in CIS was done before he was. And Diedrich is the honorable mention here. And time to break the tie. Corny, you are the icon. But Chuba, you led the nation. So it's Hubbard. We want your input on the road to the Canadian GOAT. 4 polls on Twitter this week. The foundation, Reuben Mays versus Neil Lumsden. Next gen, Eric Lapointe versus Jesse Lumsden. And running back now, it's John Cornish versus Chuba Hubbard. Chirp on up at Twitter. We'll run the wild card poll with your favorites over the weekend on the road to selecting the PointsBet Canadian College GOAT.